This is News You Can Use.
Inflation, it's on fire, and the fire department is the Federal Reserve.
Right.
So can you explain who the Federal Reserve is and what exactly their responsibilities are?
Well, they're the central bank. I think you actually have a slide that lists their responsibilities. The number one is monetary policy, and they have a dual mandate within monetary policy that explains what it is. That is keeping inflation to very low levels. They've targeted that at 2%, but that's not a matter of law. That's a choice that they have made. And to maximize employment. So that was actually put in place in 1978 as inflation was rising. And if you looked at employment in that time period, it was declining even as inflation was rising. Part of the reason that the Humphrey Hawkins bill, which was the name of the bill that instituted the dual mandate, happened. Then Paul Volcker was appointed in 1979 and started the process of disinflating the U.S. economy. But one thing that's different today, even though Chairman Powell in his press conferences has several times referenced Paul Volcker, suggesting that he would like to draft on Volcker's reputation and establish himself in that same inflation fighting mindset. One of the things that Volcker had going for him that is not the same on fiscal policy is that in the early 1980s, we had a series of tax cuts that were put in place to incent growth. So instead of transferring incomes, what was done was fiscal policy was structured to encourage work and people to grow their income, which is a sustained incentive, as opposed to, for example, one-time transfers of funds. Then in the middle of the decade of the 80s, there was passed the Graham-Redmond-Hollings bipartisan Deficit Control Act, so that there would also be some restraints on federal spending at the same time as monetary policy was tightening, but the incentives in the tax code would encourage growth. That started the process of that 40-year decline in interest rates. Today, we do not have fiscal policy playing that same role.
So monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, fiscal policy is Washington, the politicians, and their decisions about what they decide to do. And right now, they really need to be coordinating if we're going to get control of this thing, because the Fed can only do so much by themselves.
Yeah, that's right. If it's all, the Fed has two tools. They can do the quantitative easing thing, which the evidence of whether that actually helped is very difficult to find. And the way you can judge that is when, in his press conferences, which I assume you all watch the Fed's press conferences, right?
Sure.
That's an economist cocktail party. We're all there. We're all there. You know, it's all about liquidity. So, in several of his recent press conferences, he's been asked, what's the impact on interest rates of quantitative tightening? And he's given different answers each time. Well, some estimates are 25 basis points of tightening. Others say it might be less. Others might say it more, which means that the Fed doesn't have a firm view on exactly what the contribution of quantitative easing or the cost of quantitative tightening will be, which leaves them really with their one classic tool, which is the federal funds target and raising interest rates through the federal funds target. If all of the inflation has to be fought just with the Fed funds target, that's a less optimistic view about where things are going. Now, full disclosure, we put a recession into our forecast in our April forecast this past year. We were sort of out there by ourselves. But as we looked forward and thought about this and thought about the misalignment of monetary and fiscal policy, it became really hard for us to see how the Fed could get inflation back to its 2% target just by demand destruction. Because raising interest rates in this environment, you would call that demand destruction. If that's the only tool they have, and if they're in a hurry to get to 2%, then what we put in as a mild recession in the first half, starting in the first half of 2023, will likely be more severe.